Let's talk about one of the strangest and, frankly, most disturbing cases in all of medical history. We're going back to 18th century France to uncover the story of a man known only as Tarrare. His hunger was so insatiable, so all-consuming, that it made him a sideshow spectacle, a military puzzle, and in the end, a true medical nightmare.
Okay, so to even begin to understand Tarrare, you have to imagine what it was like to be near him. According to the doctors who studied him, he was followed by this constant, overpowering stench. His body was always hot, he was always sweating, and after he'd eaten, you could apparently see a vapor rising off of him. And this wasn't just, bad hygiene. This was the smell of a body that was fundamentally at war with itself.
So we're not going to start this story at the beginning. Now, that would be too simple. We're going to start at the very end, on the autopsy table. Because what surgeons found inside Tarrare's body is really the key to understanding the sheer physical anomaly that this man was. The description from his autopsy it's incredibly visceral. Picture this. Surgeons opened his mouth and could literally see a wide open channel going straight down into his stomach. His esophagus was so huge, they said you could slide a cylinder a foot in circumference down it. I mean, this wasn't just some guy with a big appetite. His actual anatomy was radically different from a normal person's. This discovery just begs the question, right? How does a human being end up this way? To figure that out, we have to rewind and take a look at the life that led to that grotesque end. Before he was a medical specimen, Tarrare was a performer. He was kicked out of his home as a teenager because his parents literally couldn't afford to feed him. So he became this traveling street artist, making a living from the exact same affliction that would later make him a medical case. And here is the central paradox of Tarrare. Even though he was constantly eating, he was incredibly thin. At 17, he weighed only 100 pounds. His body was just this collection of bizarre contradictions. A mouth so wide his lips were barely visible, and so much loose skin that when his stomach was empty, he could literally wrap the fold from his abdomen all the way around his waist. So just how much could he really eat? Well, get this. At age 17, it was documented that Tarrare could eat a quarter of a bullock. That's a young bull in a single day. That is an amount of meat equal to his own body weight. His diet was driven by one thing and one thing only, a relentless, agonizing hunger. As a performer, he would eat anything for a crowd. And this included live animals, cats, puppies, snakes. He even swallowed an entire eel whole without chewing. But when the show was over, the hunger wasn't. He'd fight dogs for rotting scraps and eat garbage right out of the gut. Tarrare's life took a really dramatic turn when he joined the French Revolutionary Army. Of course, the standard rations were nowhere near enough for him, and he collapsed pretty quickly from exhaustion and hunger. This landed him in a military hospital, and that's where he went from being a sideshow act to a subject of intense medical fascination. And that's where he caught the eye of a man named Dr. Baron Percy, a top military surgeon. Dr. Percy was fascinated. He looked past the spectacle and he saw Tarrare as a scientific puzzle that needed to be solved. He started a whole series of experiments, totally determined to understand and maybe even cure this condition that nobody had ever seen before. Dr. Percy tried everything in the 18th century medical playbook. He gave Tarrare laudanum, wine vinegar, even tobacco pills. Nothing. Absolutely nothing worked. He tried to just overwhelm the hunger with a huge diet of soft-boiled eggs. That didn't work either. Tarrare's hunger was just more powerful than any treatment they had. As all the cures failed, Tarrare's behavior inside the hospital got more and more desperate. He was caught sneaking around, drinking the blood from patients who just had bloodletting procedures. And then, in one of the most horrifying turns, he was discovered in the hospital mortuary eating the bodies of the dead. The hospital staff was absolutely horrified, but Dr. Percy kept protecting his patient. He insisted Tarrare was a medical case, not a madman. But that was before the hospital, and Tarrare's story took its absolute darkest turn. The grim reality of Tarrare's condition was about to escalate beyond anything the doctors could have possibly imagined. A toddler, just 14 months old, disappeared from inside the hospital walls. A wave of panic and suspicion just swept through the wards instantly. And immediately all eyes turned to Tarrare. Look, there was no proof. Nobody ever proved he did it. But it didn't matter, did it? The accusation alone was enough.
The man who was known to eat live animals and corpses was the immediate and only suspect. He was chased out of the hospital by an angry mob, his reputation as a monster cemented forever. And this brings us right back to where we started. 4 years after being thrown out of the hospital, Tarrare showed up again in Versailles, weak and dying. This final chapter of his life would provide the only real answers to the mystery of his body. He died at the incredibly young age of 26, and on his deathbed, he confessed to Dr. Percy that he had swallowed a golden fork 2 years earlier, and he believed it was lodged inside him, killing him. It was this claim that convinced Percy to perform one last grim examination. What they found inside was just a scene of complete biological devastation. His gullet was a wide canal. His stomach was enormous, covered in ulcers, and took up most of the space in his abdomen. His liver and gallbladder were unnaturally large. His entire insides were described as being filled with pus and basically rotting. But that golden fork he claimed to have swallowed, it was never found. So, after all the experiments, the accusations, and the gruesome autopsy, what was actually wrong with Tarrare? Well, the truth is, even today, we don't have a definitive answer. Back then, doctors just labeled his condition polyphagia, which is really just a fancy term for extreme hunger. Modern theories suggest a few possibilities. Could it have been an extreme case of hyperthyroidism, where your metabolism runs so fast it burns calories almost instantly? Or maybe damage to his brain's amygdala or hypothalamus, the parts that tell you when you're hungry and when you're full. The reality is, it was likely some complex mix of rare conditions we may never fully understand. Through all this grotesque detail, it's really important to remember that Tarrare himself is silent. His own experience, his voice, it's completely missing from the record. He was seen as a freak by audiences and basically just a set of symptoms by doctors. He was a person trapped inside a body that betrayed him in the most fundamental way imaginable. Which leaves us with one final haunting question. The story of Tarrare really forces you to ask where the person ends and the pathology begins. Was he responsible for his horrifying actions, or was he just the first and most tragic victim of his own monstrous, inexplicable hunger?